I do want to start out with this story, and it's not the most important story out there, but I do believe that this story is emblematic of what is wrong with America today, especially when it comes to our media. Tucker Carlson is apparently gone to Russia, and he may be interviewing Vladimir Putin. Not everybody knows exactly what is going on in Russia and why Tucker went to Russia. He says that it's a great town, whatever, he's in Moscow. And so the folks over there at CNN, they're absolutely losing their ever-loving minds because Tucker may be interviewing Vladimir Putin. Listen to this.
Putin is trying to court the MAGA GOP in the United States. In fact, one of the leaders of the MAGA GOP is in Moscow tonight.
Wow.
It's the man you see here with the MAGA leader Donald Trump, Tucker Carlson. Possibly there in Moscow to interview Putin. Definitely there as a Putin-supporting celebrity.
So that's Erin Burnett. And memo to Erin Burnett. I saw this clip and I thought, clearly our media has so incredibly changed. Do you know that, back when media was actually relevant and back when news organizations were actually doing their jobs, it would be a massive coup to be able to get an interview with Vladimir Putin. But because they don't agree, because CNN, a couple of different things I believe are going on. Number one, because CNN, they hate Tucker Carlson, obviously. Everybody in the mainstream news media hates Tucker Carlson. So that's number one. They don't like Tucker Carlson. Number two, he's totally scooped them because he got an interview with Vladimir Putin. And number three, so basically what Erin Burnett is saying is that they shouldn't be interviewing people that they don't necessarily agree with. Because clearly she's pro-Ukraine and anti-Vladimir Putin, which is fine. But if you're doing your job as a journalist, you want to speak to the newsmakers. You want to speak to the people who are having an impact on our world. But because she is on the side of Ukraine, I guess, and she hates Tucker Carlson, she hates MAGA, then she's blasting Tucker Carlson, in my opinion, for actually doing his job as a journalist. And that is interviewing Vladimir Putin. Now, I don't care if you agree or disagree with Vladimir Putin or Zelensky or anyone else. If you're a real journalist, you do your job and you try to get those interviews. So now journalists apparently are not allowed, in the world of CNN, are not allowed to cover news or interview world leaders that they may disagree with. And she sounds just so petulant and jealous in a way, doesn't she? And to me, this is why the media is dead, because they don't recognize that this is a very worthy news interview, very worthy news interview. And so part of what's going on is the media has taken sides. And these days, because this is what they clearly do, they are taking the side of Ukraine and anyone who is against MAGA Republicans. And I'm air quoting on MAGA Republicans. And so naturally, if Tucker Carlson is doing his job and goes out and perhaps interviews Vladimir Putin to avoid World War III, some are saying, well, to me, that's just Tucker doing his job, something CNN clearly is not doing.
Just listen to how Russian state media is breathlessly celebrating his visit.
Independent journalist Tucker Carlson has flown to Russia from the U.S. via Turkey to Vnukovo Airport. He saw Spartacus Ballet at the Bolshoi Theater, had lunch in a nice restaurant, went for a ride around town, rode the subway. He charged his smartphone via USB port and connected to a fast and free Wi-Fi internet.
Russia.
He charged his phone. Although they're knowing the details about the fact that it was during USB port may give him reason to think twice about all of this.
All right. So again, it's just, number one, listening to that news report by Russian TV. You know what it reminded me of? It reminded me of when Obama first came on the scene. And that's how they covered Obama. Just this gross adulation, right? So they actually report that Tucker Carlson is doing whatever he does in Russia. And listen, it's clearly a different kind of media. But if you listen to Erin Burnett and all these folks at CNN, it's really not all that different. Now, the Russian media is very excited that he's there. Seems to be Tucker is a little coy about whether or not this interview is actually going to happen. But for folks to criticize Tucker for possibly doing this interview is kind of silly, isn't it? The report goes on.
Look at them talking about him like a celebrity. Everything he does on camera, breathlessly repeated. Now, it is unclear if an interview between Putin and Carlson will take place, but if it does, it gives Putin a chance to sit down with a big supporter.
It might be worth asking yourself, since it is getting pretty serious, what is this really about? Why do I hate Putin so much? Has Putin ever called me a racist? Has he threatened to get me fired for disagreeing with him? Does he eat dogs? These are fair questions, and the answer to all of them is no. Vladimir Putin didn't do any of that.
So, a couple of things. Number one, isn't a journalist supposed to ask questions? I mean, I've been saying this forever now, and especially when it came to the whole Ukraine, Putin, all that stuff, at the start of the Ukraine war. Part of a journalist's job is to ask questions. But you listen to Erin Burnett, and again, not to belabor the point, but again, she sounds so incredibly jealous and petulant.
Look at them talking about him like a celebrity. Everything he does on camera, breathlessly repeated.
Well, that's because they're talking about him worldwide and nobody's talking about you, right? I mean, it does. She just sounds petulant and jealous. If you go and you look at stories regarding Tucker possibly interviewing Vladimir Putin, people are calling him a traitor. And listen, just so we're clear, I'm no fan of Vladimir Putin, but I'm sure as hell also no fan of Vladimir Zelensky. I mean, I think Putin is a butcher. I think he kills his political opponents and so forth. And I really don't believe that there are free and fair elections in Russia. But all that being said, I'm also no fan of Zelensky because I think that dude is a complete sham and a shyster. So this whole thing is just ridiculous. But for Tucker Carlson to go and interview Vladimir Putin, I don't have a problem with that, and I certainly wouldn't call him a traitor. You know who's a traitor? All these folks at CNN, they are a traitor to what their ultimate job description is, which is finding the truth. And when Tucker talks about Vladimir Putin and he talks about how, Putin never called him a racist or tried to get him fired or so forth, the audio that I just played, well, that's everything that the media in America and the activist groups in America have done not only to Tucker Carlson, but to many people on the right who they have branded as, air quoting, MAGA, right? Called us racist if we actually thought or talked about that COVID came from a Chinese lab. Told us that we wanted to kill people if we simply asked questions about vaccinations and the negative impact of lockdowns. Called us racist. They're still doing this if we want border security. The media in this country helped Joe Biden win the election by discrediting the very credible laptop from hell. Social media, obviously a big part of that campaign as well. And the media worked with Fauci to make sure that any dissenting opinions were shut down. So when you hear what Tucker has to say about his side of the story, about his wanting to interview Vladimir Putin or this defense of Vladimir Putin or whatever it might be, he's got some very valid points. And he is absolutely right when it comes to the media and what they have done to America. Their job is supposed to be to inform America, but what they're really trying to do is manipulate America and manipulate elections and put forward political narratives and not actually report the truth. So I love how Erin Burnett, she is oh so concerned about how Tucker is a supporter of Vladimir Putin. By the way, is there any actual proof that he is an actual supporter of Vladimir Putin? I don't know. I don't know if there's any actual proof that Vladimir Putin is, or that Tucker is a fan of Vladimir Putin, or that he is a supporter. I think Tucker just wants to know the truth.
Well, did anybody say that about Diane Sawyer when she interviewed the Taliban after 9/11? I never heard any criticism of that.
Well, you know, it used to be, Johnny, that's a fantastic point. And when you look at the fact that there have been many legit journalists, and I believe Tucker is a legit journalist, but I believe that there has been many journalists in the past when they were far more legit journalists than there are now that have always interviewed, you know, what they would deem as strong men or, you know, corrupt leaders or whatever it is. And that's part of journalism. I'm sure that Saddam Hussein was interviewed a time or two. I mean, we could go down the list of who was it that went and interviewed Osama bin Laden. Remember when Osama bin Laden was interviewed? I forget who it was. So I don't know what crack that Erin Burnett is smoking. I mean, you can just tell that she has a deep-seated hatred for Tucker Carlson. I think that's what it is. Because he's actually out there doing journalism, and she is clearly not. What she's doing is narrative peddling. I think that is part of what it is. So I don't believe that wanting to interview Vladimir Putin is, makes him a traitor. I think that makes him a good journalist. And if CNN had half their wits about them, they would go and interview Vladimir Putin as well. And by the way, you know, the other thing that I would say about all this is that if you really want to stick it to Vladimir Putin, because you're not a supporter of Vladimir Putin, and I'm not a supporter of Vladimir Putin, but if you really want to stick it to him, then why don't you ask for an interview and ask him the tough questions? Why don't you do that? Instead of just castigating Tucker Carlson, who has the journalistic curiosity to go interview one of the world's biggest newsmakers.